Hello, everyone, and welcome to International Coaches Club, the podcast where international coaches share their stories and how they've made an impact on their sport in the US, from college programs to professional and national teams. I'm your host, Liran Zamir. Her journey began in Alberta, Canada, where a passion for sports science and coaching would eventually take her across the border to build one of the most premier collegiate rowing programs in the United States. More than 2 decades ago, she arrived to Washington State University with a vision. Since then, she has transformed the Cougars into a perennial national contender, leading the program to a 14 NCAA Championship appearances, while mentoring Olympians, All-Americans, and generations of student athletes. She is now the longest tenured female head coach in Washington State University history. Her path has never been defined by wins or championships. With degrees in physical education, athletic therapy, and a PhD in biomechanics, she has built a coaching philosophy that blends science, leadership, and the human side of the athlete development. Today, after more than a 35-year career in coaching, her influence extends far beyond rowing through the athletes, coaches, and leaders she has helped to shape. Jane LaRiviere is my guest today. Coach Jane, thank you so much for joining my podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing just great, and I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited that you're here as well. I didn't record for a while. I was abroad on vacation, so my hair is different, and I'm excited to revisit my podcast. And I wanted to ask what stood out the most from the little introduction.
Well, I think when you're in the day-to-day coaching world, you don't really think so much about your legacy. But when I was at San Diego Crew Classic this year, the announcer actually called me a legendary coach. And I was like, what? Like, who are they talking about? But I think it just happens, like I coached for 10 years at Oregon State, or 8 years at Oregon State, and I just finished my 24th year. And so I've been coaching longer than I think the announcer's been alive. So I guess that just sort of, it's surprising to me every time I think. I don't spend that much time thinking about how long I've been doing this, but when I do, it's like, wow.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. That's we choose this profession because it's I do feel I work when I go to the coach, and time can just fly, and I've been doing it for a long time too, so I definitely can relate. I want to start in the beginning where it all started in Alberta, Canada. How did you start with rowing?
Well, I actually came to it fairly late. I suppose in Canada, it's more club-based anyway than school-based. So I actually, my mother was a figure skating coach, and my father was a hockey player. He played at the Chicago Blackhawks for a little while.
Oh.
And he was like third string goalie. So, but still at that time, there was only 6 teams in the league. So you had to be pretty good to even get that far. And so as a result, I skated almost every day till I was about 9. And I was it wasn't for me at the end of the day. And my mom said, that's fine. You can do, as long as you do some sport, that's fine. But you have to tell your coach that you're quitting. So I skated for 2 more months and got up the nerve to quit. And I did. And then I sort of went to racket sports. I played squash every day through high school. And I went to the University of Calgary to start the kinesiology program. And I saw a sign up in the locker room saying, learn to row. And that's my hometown. And I knew exactly where Glenmore Reservoir was. And I had seen rowing. And I just went and said, hey, can I learn how to do this? And they said, yeah, you're a little too late for this fall, but you can row in this tank for the next 6 or 7 months. So I actually started in September, and then the Glenmore Reservoir didn't thaw until like April 1st or something. And so I rode only on land for the first half year, and then I got out in boats and then rode for the next few years there.
Fantastic. That's cool. And you know, I have so many questions about that. Like for me in volleyball or basketball, there are just tournaments that you go and then you just roam around courts and you see players. So later on in the interview, I will definitely ask you about the recruiting process as well. But at what point you realize that you want to be a coach this sport and kind of make it your profession?
Well, I have been coaching, as I said, about 32, 33 years in the collegiate level here in the US.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably wasn't until I'd been coaching 6 years that I actually thought of it as a viable option. My intent was to become a professor, and I just coached on the side. Like I went to grad school at Oregon State, and I had a regular graduate teaching assistantship, and I did that for 2 years, got most of my coursework out of the way, and I was teaching anatomical kinesiology, and a bunch of rowers came in and said that the coaching staff had been fired and that I should apply because all of my examples had to do with rowing. And so on a whim, I just applied because then I thought, oh, you're not under, I could make enough money to be there. As long as you're an employee of the university, my visa worked out okay. And I could take credits for like $15 a credit. And I didn't have to be under the thumb of sometimes unreasonable professors. And so I kind of bought my way out of, and so then I all of a sudden was dabbling. I ended up sort of studying osteoporosis and how to improve bone mass in young women. And so I dabbled in this lab, and I coached rowing, the novice team at Oregon State for 8 years. And honestly, I wasn't seriously thinking about rowing until I actually got a call my last year, and I had defended my dissertation, and this Marcia Sainholtz, who's still alive, still one of my main mentors, asked me to apply for the head coaching job because the head coach here had retired. And I honestly, I was like, what do I want to go to Washington State for? Like, because I still was thinking about being a professor. And my office mate said, you're an idiot for not going to look. Like, do you know how hard it is to get head coaching jobs? And it turns out that it's the closest head coaching job to Calgary, where I'm from. So it's a 9-hour drive from here, and I was living 15 or 16 hours away. And so I was like, okay, I'll go. And I was kind of determined to hate it. But at every turn, the budget was good. The athletes were there. The Snake River is one of the most beautiful places to row. I just had amazing support in this department. And, I look back and I have always had really positive experiences here, and I just kept going, and here we are.
I love it. That's a really, really good story. And you mentioned that what brought you initially to the US was grad school, and then you stayed. Was there any moment early on that you thought if this was the right decision for you to leave Canada and come here to the US?
Um, well, I always wanted to go to school here for some reason. And I literally grew up caring about two things: academics and sports. And I think anybody who comes from another country realizes you show up here and you just have no idea the collegiate sports system and the NCAA, and you come from these little tiny places that don't have any money, and the equipment is really old, and everything's shiny and new and supported. And I knew I wanted to go to school here, but it didn't equate at that moment. Like I don't think, unless you're a hockey coach or a rowing or a figure skating coach, those, you don't really think in Canada growing up that that's a viable, because you just get it like, oh, you might coach for a season and you'll get $1,000. It's just a stipend kind of situation usually for most of the coaching situations. And so I didn't grow up thinking that this was going to be the way it was. But once I got here, I went back to Canada for a couple of years after my master's. And that's kind of where I got more involved in coaching, because I coached at the University of Western Ontario. I think they just call it Western now. And I was in the right place at the right time. The Canadian women's team was training there, and Al Morrow, who's a famous coach, was there. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know how lucky I was at that point, just to ride in his launch every day and steal all of his information. Like it just was so lucky how things worked out.
That's very good. Awesome. So, other than the facilities and the the things that were obvious
Budget.
that are different between Canada and America, what was the thing that most surprised you about the American athletics culture compared to the Canadian one, other than the money and the facilities?
Yeah. I think just the vast number of people participating in sport.
Hmm.
And, I always had 8 or less people to row with when I was in Calgary. And here the teams are 45 to 60, 70 people in each
Wow.
university. And so it's just the sheer magnitude and being able to train alongside a whole pile of people was, the energy and like we don't have anything like football game days in Canada.
Right.
And it's so fun. Like, you come here and you row, but supporting the other athletes and seeing a very high level of football, high level of basketball, high level of track and field, for me, it was kind of like heaven, because I just love sports of all kinds. And that's sort of what drove me or directed me into biomechanics, because it's just basically engineering of movement, or the science of movement. And I have an eye for figure skating, and I have an eye, and like just it's just something that and rowing, I guess, like I don't really need a machine or a data analysis to know if somebody's moving a boat well.
It's all in your head, so that's perfect.
Yeah.
There are more popular sports, less popular sports. I don't know anything about rowing. If I'll tell you, give me an elevator pitch for for the sports of rowing and for the benefit of our listeners as well, what would it be? How would it sound like? What can we learn about rowing real quick that we need to know?
Okay, well, it favors tall people, which I am not. It favors people who have good lungs. Like, they say the pain of rowing a 6.5 minute or 6 minute rowing race is equivalent to like 3 800-meter runs in a row.
Oh,
Because after about, a minute, you start to get into anaerobic crisis, and you got to still go the rest of the race. And so, rowers have amongst the highest, cardiovascular efficiency, sort of like cross country skiers. And but the difference, I think, is, you still have the power component, because you're in a boat that weighs about 200 pounds. If you're in an 8, all the rowers are probably 150 pounds. So you're getting a pretty massive object moving as fast as you can in the first 30 seconds of a race. And then you got to get into sort of an aerobic portion of the race, which is never easy. And then at the last 200 meters, you got to go again to try to get in front of whoever, if anybody's in front of you, to try and last ditch attempt to, get ahead. And so, like I would, if you're 6 feet tall, like my ideal maybe athlete is 6 feet tall, probably for women around 155 pounds. And the joy in training, they have to, we're a training sport, like swimming.
mhm.
You've got to, it's not, oh, change it up, like volleyball is a crazy sport for me, because you need to concentrate for long periods of time, but only in 15-second increments.
Tops. Yeah.
So here is just overcoming boredom. And, it takes a long time to build your engine and get the most out of your body. And women Olympians, and I don't know what it's like in volleyball either, but it's rare that anybody makes it before their late 20s. And there's still women winning medals into their mid 30s. And I just think it takes that amount of time to get an elite level of fitness.
That's very cool. Awesome. Well, that's great. Thank you for that. And back to you. You came here in Canada. There were low numbers here, and like in every other sports, that's something I hear across the board, that coaches are very surprised of the numbers, the level of numbers of participants. And then you recruit American rowers. And what is your advantage as an international coach with those athletes?
Well, I actually think the international coach is more beneficial with the international athletes. Because over my career, we've had people from probably 15 different countries. We currently have 9 New Zealanders, Kiwis.
Oh, wow.
I've had lots of Canadians. I've had lots of Czech Republic, Lithuanians. I think that the sheer, like we do recruit and sometimes get top level Americans. But in my sport, the competition for the better known programs like the Michigans and the Cal and the Stanford and the Ivy League, it's pretty fierce competition. And, there's probably only 30 girls in high school that are currently performing at the level that you need. And there's 100 rowing programs or 110. And so we have, we'll recruit people that are good canvases. So they're tall and they've got some strengths and they've got a good erg score. And then we hope to develop them and bring them along to sort of a more on the track to becoming elite. But we can get the top kids out of different countries. And, every university, as I'm sure you know, has their own qualities and characteristics. And Pullman is a fantastic college town. It appeals to a lot of Kiwis because they are born and raised. And unless you were in Auckland, you probably were in a small town. So, you just have to find the best available athletes and, try to find the right fit. And I think that's true for probably every university, and every coaching staff has like characteristics that, you attract a certain kind of person because those are the kind of people that you want to work with.
Very good. Awesome. Um, you mentioned there was something open at Washington State and you didn't know whether you wanted or not. And a lot of times in athletic programs, there was a big shift and revolving doors of coaches coming in and out. You had mentioned that the coach before you retired, so I assume they were there for a while, and now you're there for a while. What did you inherit when you came into the program? What was already established, and what did you change from there to build more?
Do you mind if I take you on a little tiny bit of a history?
Of course, I'm a history
Okay,
major.
so
My pleasure.
NCAA, the first year of NCAA women's rowing was 1997. In 94, 95, it became an emerging sport. So because Washington State actually led the country in Title IX equity, there was all sorts of lawsuits in the 80s that changed the way women's sports were supported.
Mhm.
And they started rowing in 1990 here. So in some ways, they added it for equity, but they started it earlier than most of the programs in the entire country. All of the Big Ten schools were added like in 96, 97. And so I actually inherited a team that was in pretty good shape. Like there was lots of tall girls. They did a lot of out of sport recruiting. My first year, all we did was just add a bit more distance to the training program. And there we were at NCAA's, because we kind of were ahead. Subsequently, there's lots of competition now. There was probably a little bit less back then, but And then of course, by the time you get into the 2000s, lots of schools are, having support. And I think staying at Washington State for so long, I think I always have felt that we could do really well here and win here. And we've got enough things, like there isn't any major roadblocks to my success. It's how good at athletes can we get? How can we train them up? They're letting us do the things that we need to do. And then when I first arrived here, 3 of the 6 administrators in the athletic department were women. And it was almost uncanny back then to have so many women in positions of leadership and power. And I think the equity piece has been something that has served us. We were having 10-win football seasons, and we were supporting rowing and swimming and tennis. So it wasn't all about football. And so it was kind of an interesting model to be a part of. And I don't know if you've followed volleyball, but that's one of our most successful sports too.
Yeah, not too bad. That's pretty good. That's cool. So with that being said, what did you bring that was yours, and what did you build upon that later on?
Well, I think the training program, just a little bit, just again, in part luck that I got an opportunity to hang out with some of the best coaches in the world in Canada. And I started to really learn about their training programs. And, it used to be that when I rowed in 83, 84, and 85, women only raced 1,000 meters. And in 1986 was the first time that women raced 2,000 meters, the double the distance. So back when I rowed, it was more power. It was just, big and strong. And, then you had to become far more of an endurance athlete when they switched. So I think that there was still, in 1990s, they hadn't quite figured out that you needed to do that distance. And so I literally think the main thing was we started doing 3 20-minute pieces on the erg, and they had used to be doing 8 by 500 meters on the erg, just a kind of an adjustment of the training program. But the girls that I inherited, like Michelle Kistler, who was the previous recruiting person, I had a fabulous incoming freshman class. Our first New Zealand kid, we had a Polish kid, and those guys formed the foundation for what became Washington State's greatest success when we came 4th at NCAA's.
Very cool.
So that success allowed us to get better recruits, but I had good ones when I came.
That's awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
I wish that upon any coach. And with that being said, what was the hardest season in your career at Washington State?
Well, there's several ways of measuring that. I always feel like, I think I have a fairly accurate idea about what a team's capable of. And it's not always winning. It's, maybe top 10, maybe top 15, maybe for any given conglomeration of people, just getting to NCAA's is good. But I always find it really hard, and the summers are really long when I feel like we've underperformed. And I can thankfully say that's only happened a handful of times in my career. So I feel like we usually are ready for our best race when it counts most. But the years that we miss that mark, those are disappointing. And then you know what? From being a coach yourself, sometimes you might recruit the wrong person. And the hard years are the ones when we can't get the team to gel and the chemistry is missing. And so those years I find, especially after this amount of time, it's like, oh no, now what do we do? Because, you can lead a horse to water, but sometimes you just can't make them drink. And those are really, really hard years when you maybe, and that's an example of when the portal can work in your favor. Say, I think maybe you should get in the portal. I got this great idea.
Okay. So, message to everyone who's listening and who's good. It's kind of important. You know, you've been doing it for a while, and you're going back and forth with the, you know, to history and all the stories in the beginning. What changed in those 20 years in Washington, more in Washington State? What changed in Jane as a coach? And
Mm.
if Jane today, that's a two parts question. If Jane today were to able to go back to the first season, what would you have done differently?
I probably would have been a little more subtle. I think when like if you're a brand new head coach, 24 years ago, I had far fewer tools in my tool belt than I do now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I might have been I think I was probably a little aggressive at times when I could have been a little softer sell. And, you know, I think, I mean, I've not really ever been a huge yeller, but I probably was a little bit more hot tempered, and you don't get anywhere when you aren't communicating in an effective way. And very rarely is the shouting the effective way. You know, maybe twice a year you need to rattle their cage a little bit, but it's not the way that people learn and relax and find rhythm and all the things that are necessary in so many different sports.
Yeah.
Um, so I think just learning, you know, there's never been a year that I haven't learned. And, you know, I don't consider myself a great coach, but I do consider myself uh, open-minded, and I always want to learn something. And so if you keep learning a little bit each year for 32 years, then all of a sudden you have a good stocked tool belt or tool kit
I love
of
it.
resources, you know?
Yeah, 100%. You know, with that being said, what do you think your athletes would describe you as, and uh, you know, going the other way around, what don't you like, or what kind of behaviors you don't tolerate in your program?
Um, well, I I think that athletes have, as female athletes over the last 35 years, have gotten more sports minded. Like, I think that they have had a higher level of training. I think they've had better experiences when they've been in high school. I think the coaches have demanded things. I think, you know, 25 years ago, it was like, oh, I might not be at practice today because I have my period. And it's like, well, they're not going to change the Pac-12 championships if that falls on the same day as your next period, you know? And so just working through the things that, you know, like, you don't get to pick and choose. Like, if you decide to be a brain surgeon, you can't have off days. Like, your life there, you know, it's not, rowing is not life and death, but you have to train so that you're prepared when it's your biggest moment under the most amount of stress. And if you aren't consistent, you can't expect to perform. And I do think that the level of expectation has improved over the long term compared to when I was an athlete, you know, in the 80s, you know, and the training and the competency and the expectation has grown. And I think that as a result, we have more focused athletes with bigger dreams, bigger goals. The second part of the question is, you know, it's really, you know, if you can't say anything nice, don't say it. You know, like it's just, you know, every single human is different. And the more time you spend as a group getting to know each other, it becomes more and more difficult to focus on the one negative attribute when there's maybe 10 positive attributes. We're
Mhm.
not all going to be best friends, but there has to be a functioning level of respect. You have to be able to recognize that the person sitting down next to you is working just as hard. And you have to know when, you know, like in leadership, you know, everybody wants to be a good leader, but the leaders that are effective are the ones that realize that they have to be the kind of people that want to be followed. So that's like a connection that a lot of people learn, and in the initial stages, they forget. They just lead. And they forget that the message is, come along with me. Why would I want to? Give me those reasons.
That's very good. Well, that was definitely a good. You can implement those answers in all sports, so I love it. But you coach Olympians, all the Lithuanian and the New Zealand and all those guys, and you coach beginners, right? Now you mentioned that at some point you would just take a person as like a blank canvas, tall, athletic, and then teach them. But when you think about those beginners or those Olympians, what do they have in common when it comes to rowing? And when you start with someone who is a beginner, can you tell right away? Because you have tall people in volleyball or basketball, but they're not very coordinated. But
Yeah.
how is it in rowing?
Well, I think like there's two ways of approaching this. First of all, rowing is one of the only sports that you could actually learn in college, and 8 to 10 years later, you could go to the Olympics. You're trying to perfect one motion. If you've got the right kind of muscle fibers, if you've got like a genetically gifted, if you're genetically gifted in a cardiovascular way, if you're tall, you're strong, you have most of the components. But one thing that I have observed just through, various people, Lisa Roman, Yeva Adamova-Shute, Nicole Hare, like the girls that have gone on to great things, they never feel like they're good enough. They're always like, what else can I do? Like they're looking after their nutrition and their sleeping and their eating, and like they just take it to another level. And a lot of times with those women, you have to hold them back because they just, and they are competitive and they're amazing athletes, but I don't think anyone goes to the World Championships or the Olympics in any sport unless they're a supreme physical being in whatever sport they're in. But the thing that is the difference is they place themselves in some ways, it's a super vulnerable place to be because they're doing everything right that they can control. And then they have to still go and be selected. And that selection is somewhat out of their control. They've got to compare themselves against whoever else is there. And it's hard for people, I think, to recognize the vulnerability in trying to make a national team or an Olympic team when you're comparing all the greatest apples in the room. And sometimes you make it and sometimes you don't.
Very good. Awesome. You have a background that includes a PhD in biomechanics. How has science influenced the way you coach today or when you started?
Well, I think one of the small things that I'm proud of is that we don't get a lot of injuries. Like it's a repetitive sport. There's lots of wrists, lots of ribs, lots of back problems. And I think because of our technique and I think the foundation of proper movement and how forces work on the body, I do think that the way we train and the way we race and the way we approach things is good for preventing injuries. Now, if somebody is so fatigued that they're losing their technique, then, all bets are off because, things can happen. But I think it just the posture of the whole thing and movement and repeating things that you want to see as opposed to practicing bad strokes or bad form and breaking it down and taking enough reps to sort of ingrain a proper movement pattern into your body. And then, the other stuff is that, like, I guess I understand forces and I understand, you know, the physics of a boat moving through the water and the physics of an oar moving the boat through the water, and obviously how to maximize your lengths, because there's only a couple of ways to go faster in an 8, and that's to take more strokes per minute or to make longer strokes. So, just sort of maximizing the basics without putting bodies at risk.
That's very cool. Yeah, because I've been that's really connects to the next question about, like, in volleyball or basketball, you take data of many different movements and passing and shooting and all those things. And rowing, you said it's one motion, so it's either longer or faster.
Yeah. That doesn't take into account, the weather, because there's the wind, the crosswind, the tailwind,
Right.
headwind, the
The sea, I
waves.
guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you're taking analytics, you're looking at all the biomechanics and everything that and you coach with. How do you balance it with your coaching instinct, and just what do you see without counting on data?
I have 3 younger people on staff, and they know all about the technology. And I will say, what do you think here? And they'll give me their opinion, and then I'll go, it kind of lines up with what I'm seeing, or it doesn't line up, like it. So I probably, if anything, I should probably get a little more into it. But I think I rely quite a bit on my eye and communication with the coxswain and communication with the rowers, because the rowers know when things are going well. It's a different sound. It's a different feeling. I watch the bow of the boat and how the bow moves through the water, and I watch the puddles and the releasing the water, and so I guess even though I have a scientific background, I pretty much rely on my eye and a training program that has been tweaked for 30 years. Like, if you can
Very good.
hit these, there's certain measures in my head that if we can do that successfully, repeatedly in practice, we should be able to do it on race day.
I wish it was like that, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned that Washington State were like a pioneer school or very advanced towards women and Title IX and so on. Has coaching for you changed for women and for women around you since the beginning of your career?
Oh, I wish I felt more positive about that. I do. I don't know the numbers, but it wouldn't be that hard to figure out. But it does feel like there's fewer women head coaches and fewer. I think there's still opportunities, but I think that there's still a lot of pressure that I think women put on themselves. Like, I think one of the reasons that I navigated through my life with being a mom is that I had a coach who was a mom, and she coached from about 4 o'clock to 7 p.m. most evenings, like not every evening, but 3 or 4 times a week. And we had babysitters, and I feel like I turned out just fine, So I think I didn't have the guilt that a lot of people feel not spending enough time with their children. I, of course, had to make sure that they were cared for and looked after and, loved, but my quality time was in the mornings. Like, I made my assistants, look after all the early morning practices, and I stayed at home, made breakfast, got AJ to school, and then, obviously weekends, and she traveled with me a lot. And, it was just my way of doing it. I can't say it's the right way, but I do know from talking to a lot of young coaches and young mothers, and they put a lot of stress on themselves, because I think they're sort of looking at the other families going, oh my goodness, it's like they're doing this, I should be doing this and doing this and doing that. And I just kind of wish people would cut themselves some slack and understand that if you love your job and if you're passionate, modeling that to your kids is probably the best thing you could do. You know, just the happiness that, you know, or the hard parts, or the, you know, like I don't know. I don't know. I think I started probably going to conferences 32 years ago, and they're still talking about the same things, how to manage, you know, and now the dads are getting into the act, you know, like, it's like, I'm saying this tongue in cheek. It's kind of a joke, but it's kind of serious. Kids don't need 24 hours, 24/7 supervision. They need to be at some games on their own, or at some, like, I just don't think it's the way to make the best, most independent, think on your feet kind of kid if you're hovering there all the time, which seems to be popular right now.
Very much so. Well, thank you for the parenting advice. That's very much appreciated. Um, Going back to to the coaching and your career, what's the accomplishment you're most proud of?
Boy, I think I get a lot of satisfaction every year, remembering back to what the graduating class were like when they were freshmen, and the personal and professional and physical, mental, emotional growth that those women go through for a 4-year period is, like, I know that they're better, more capable people when they leave than when they came in. And that will continually be my satisfaction. I'm proud of the number of assistant coaches who are head coaches. I'm proud of the number of women who stay involved in the sport in some way. But I think that's, you know, just feeling like you're doing something worthwhile, you know, and of course winning is fun,
Very. So
but
if you had to kind of put a sentence around success the way you see it today, what would it sound like?
um that more times than not, my teams were ready to have the best possible performance when it mattered the most, and that they felt they had done their best, not me. It doesn't matter what I think, it matters what they think. If they left it all out on the course, and whether that resulted in a first place or a third place, you have an initial disappointment if you don't win. But when you reflect back on the season, you need to be able to think about, realistically, yes, this was probably close to what was our best, you know,
Awesome.
or I PB'd this year. Like, one of my coaching sort of credos is, like, I always want to create an environment where people feel like their time is well spent. Happiness is overrated, but feeling like you're moving forward, you're either getting closer to your teammates, you're getting fitter, you're getting stronger, you're getting mentally tougher, like, just making sure that more moments than not are uh, productive, that they
Mhm.
feel that way.
Very good. If an international coach, or rather a Canadian coach, would call you and say, "Hey, Jane, I want to move to the US. I want to build a program, athletic program. What's the what advice you can give me?"
Um, well, I think the biggest stumbling block is finding a place that will help you get a visa, like a green card or a work permit, H-1B.
Well, I'm sorry. Let's say they're already here and they want
Oh,
to move
okay.
to build. Yes.
Um, well, I guess, um, do they, like, the answer changes if a person has a little time to seek out like a really good program and maybe volunteer for a semester, or, you know, I do think that gaining some street cred from an established coach can really help you move forward, because they're the person that can recommend you. And it's still a lot of, you know, who you know and how you're connected, and that kind of thing. So I definitely think it's valuable to maybe identify a place where you want to go learn and try to, like I have a volunteer coach right now. He's a scientist and he works in the tech park here, but he coached in Vermont and he coached at Skidmore and he rode at Skidmore. And, um, I would recommend him anywhere because he's been volunteering for a year and a half and he's fantastic. He has his PhD and he's making way more money than rowing coaches, but he doesn't need the job, but he could get a job if he wanted it.
Got it.
And I
Very
just
cool.
think it's hard to break in if you don't have a visa. If you're already here, I think just find some place that you feel like you can learn. Not just like, I think there's an expectation that you already know how to coach something, like a little bit of coaching, but learning the system and learning NCAA rules and learning, like there's a whole pile of things that you need to have on board to be successful.
Yes. And while we're already on it, can you tell us the story about how you got your visa?
Yes.
It's always good to have
Yeah.
multiple
Well, it's
stories
kind
to
of,
influence.
so my dad's dad was born in North Dakota. And my dad had 3 brothers and a sister. And the other 3 brothers would go after they retired from their jobs, they would go to Arizona to golf and spend the winter because Calgary and Edmonton are really cold in the winter. And they figured out that if they were citizens, they would be able to pay local green fees on the golf course instead of the out-of-state fees. And so they literally moved forward and used my grandfather's citizenship to get their own citizenship. And when they did this whole process, because my dad was then now a citizen, I applied, I filled out some paperwork, but the number was 10 years away. Like it just, like it was a long, long process. But the irony is that I had moved into an H-1B visa at Oregon State. And then I finally checked and my number had come up. And so I just paid an immigration lawyer and we just went through the whole process and I got a family-based green card.
Very good. Okay. Look, I have so many stories. I have my story. I know a coach that got a visa by winning an Olympic medal. Did you know that you can apply for America
No.
if you get a Nobel Prize or Olympic medal, stuff
Oh,
like that?
special.
America wants the special people. So, yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Before we finish here, there are a couple more questions. And that one is about the American culture. And what do you think that there is one big thing that American coaches can learn from us internationals?
Hmm. I looked at that question and I'm not exactly sure how to answer it, but I can answer it from the point of view of I grew up in Canada, in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And at that time, the US was a superpower and Canada was known as a peacekeeper. Like we hadn't participated in a war since the Second World War, I think. And so we always were on these peacekeeping missions. And I think the adjustment that I made when I came here was like, like, I do think America's awesome. Like I wouldn't have lived here for the last 30 years if I didn't love it. But I think that it's sort of a different psychology when you've been kind of fed that you're the keeper of the world as opposed to the peacekeeper of the world. And, they're always a little bit more vibrato and a little bit more, like, I just think Canadians in general are a little, I might be more like an American now, who knows, right? But I think you start off in Canada being a little bit more humble. And I think that sport isn't a way to get rich in Canada. Whereas you can get rich in tennis and golf and basketball and football and, if you're involved in a sport that pays bucks. And so I think it's really easy for me to know that sport is so very important, even if you're not going to get rich from it. And I think that has served me at some point, just doing it for the sheer challenge of it and what it gives to you and how it strengthens many parts of a person that, you want to work hard when you're 20s so that you're not a boring 40-year-old.
All right, very cool. Usually I ask coaches who are coaching, team sports with a ball, what their favorite drill, but can you share like a favorite or a really good, how would I even say it, boat drill or
Yeah, yep, we do drills. I mean, we have break down the parts of the stroke. So we'll row like half stroke. Sometimes we'll do pause drills at certain points in the stroke. And I usually start off practice with quite a few drills, and we always do pause drills. Not always, but regularly pause drills, regular shortening up, like might be quarter slide or half slide or, just on the square. Like normally when you take your blade out of the water, you feather it. And so we'll row with square blade because it teaches shape around the turn. So yeah, it's obviously a different kind of sport, but we do lots of drills.
Yeah, you mentioned it's different and it's very similar. How do you keep the athletes engaged every day doing the same motion?
Well, you vary pressure and you vary time, pieces. And like I'd say the fall is a little bit more because that like is a lot of distance and a lot of, and then it gets to be a little bit more fun when we're preparing for racing because we do a lot more sprints and short bits. But I think by the time you get here, like most of our rowers have rowed 4 to 6 years already. So they know about the slog
Mm.
and they have achieved a certain amount of they know what it's like. And so I think the ones that have a hard time concentrating don't make it here.
Mm.
You know.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, can you tell us a funny story or most memorable story from your coaching here, your time coaching here?
Um well, one time I was like this coxswain, like the coxswain's the little person that's kind of like a little Napoleon in the boat, and they, run the race plan, they run practice, they develop a sense of feel. They're the only people that can see all 8 oars at the same time. And I mean,
Okay.
I can do it too if I drive my boat behind. But this coxswain was doing something or other, and she ended up knocking like a $700 computer into the water. And it was, and that she was trying to back up the boat. These boats are like 58 feet long, and, she's trying to maneuver the boat around. And I just said, I'll get it. And by this time, it had sunk into the water. And of course, water magnifies it. And I thought, oh, I'll get it. And then I realized when I really did finally get it, more than half of my body weight was outside of my boat, and I fell all the way into the water.
Oh my God. Yeah, that pulled you in.
And then, so that was like in 2016. And so the team was just like, they didn't know what to do. Like they were laughing, but they were trying not to laugh. And I had all these big coats on because it was cold. And so I couldn't even get myself out of the boat until I took off like 2 layers. So I'm sitting in the water, unzipping parkas and throwing them on the boat. And I finally was able to climb in, and I said, well, I just saved myself. No thanks to you people who, and
Oh
they
my
were
God.
just like, yeah. So that was
That is a
one of
funny
the funnier
story. And
ones.
I hope it's on camera somewhere, somehow.
It's not, thank goodness.
Awesome. Okay. I want to finish with a speed round of questions. I'm going to ask you a few questions. You can answer in a word or a short sentence. Okay. All right. One word that defines your coaching philosophy.
Direct and fair. That's 2 words, sorry.
Still good. If you could coach any athlete in history, doesn't have to be rowing, who would that be?
Oh, be a part of Muhammad Ali, I think. I think
Okay.
that'd be pretty cool.
What's the best coaching advice you've ever received?
Well, one of my main mentors said to me when I was about 25, doesn't matter what you do, Jane, you don't know anything until you're 40 anyway.
Nice. No, is it true?
I think so. I mean, you know stuff, but I don't think you really start to feel comfortable until you've coached a long time.
Fair. When athletes describe you, and you said either say nice thing or don't say anything at all, but when do they describe you in one word? What do you hope they would say?
I think fair is, I mean, I'd like to be competent and fair.
Great. What's one mistake young coaches make over and over?
They talk too much.
What's the one book every coach should read?
Oh, well, for rowing, I don't think there is any more exciting book than the last 100 pages of Boys in the Boat.
I'm gonna write it down.
Yeah, like it's a true, like it's in some ways rowing's a bit inaccessible to the average person, but that description in the last 100 pages of that book was, I've probably
Awesome.
read it 50 times.
Amazing. If you weren't a rowing coach, what would you be?
Well, probably a basketball coach. They make a lot more money.
Nice. Okay, if you had an opportunity to represent coaching Canada or the US, who would you choose?
Ooh, well, I've already coached the U23 team for Canada in 22, but I'm a free agent, man. Like I would love to get into some international coaching, but and I had a fantastic time, but I was exhausted when I came back to school here, and that's not a great way to start a season. And so
Right.
I'm just going to wait till I retire to hopefully delve into a little bit more international coaching.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so we have your next opportunity in your career. You're still very young, and you're young with, a great toolbox now after all these years in collegiate rowing in the US. I have to tell you, never watched rowing, never saw them, practice or anything, but I will. And it gave me the urge to go on YouTube and perhaps even go to like an event. For sure, I will go to an event. Every time I interview a coach, I would like to also see from up close. If I'm ever in Washington, I'll hit you up, of course, to come and watch a
Yeah.
practice. Um, that was fascinating. And, other than just rowing, I think the way you carry yourself is your demeanor is very, it's great. I think a lot of coaches can learn from you from all sports. I definitely took a few pointers, and yeah, I think definitely experience over the years help, but the earlier you understand, and young coaches, right? I'm starting to get old and getting to the 40s when I start understanding stuff. But the more we hear you guys, the coaches who are there for many years, and we can implement the things you do and you say in our programs, the better for everybody else. So I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate you sharing your personal story and everything you do today. It was refreshing too. I didn't know what to expect. Maybe like an old school coach, but it seems like you're up to date with philosophies and everything around the NCAA. So I really appreciate your time. Anything that you would like to add?
No, it's been my pleasure. And, as a rowing coach, it also makes me feel special because, we're not usually on the top of the list of, people to be interviewed. So it's kind of cool to get a little bit more about rowing out there. And, I think it's a cool service that you're providing with your podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'll see you hopefully soon.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Go Cougs.
Thank you for listening to another episode of International Coaches Club. Today, it was Jane LaRiviere, head coach at Washington State University, rowing for the first time on this podcast. She is a wonderful example of a person behind the coach and the interpersonal connection that you can make with the athletes. I think it's remarkable. I think that I learned a lot from this episode because just talking to her on a human level, you see that she speaks the same way with everybody, especially her athletes. And then being so exposed and transparent, they fight for her, they compete for her, and then they have the same objectives with the program. She was very transparent overall, and I think she shared the struggles as well as all the successes. And it was just great having her. So, not a lot of coaches, especially female coaches, are staying in one program for long. They always aspire to go somewhere else because somewhere is better, quote unquote. And I think that she did the right path and the right thing by staying in one home and shape it for generations. She's a true legend. And this season, I wish her nothing but success. Please follow us on Instagram, on Facebook, and listen to us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Today was great. Join us and see you then.